This is the Visions and Tones podcast with Dr. T.
Welcome to the latest entry of the Visions and Tones podcast. Today I'm talking to an incredible person, as I always do. But just to give a bit of a caveat about this episode, it should not be treated as a psychological diagnosis for people. This is because I'm not really chatting to a psychologist or a counselor, but I'm talking to a research expert. I'm talking to a sociologist. She completed her PhD in the sociology department at the University of Johannesburg, and she's a lecturer in the sociology department at the University of South Africa. And she titled a brilliant paper, which is, well, she's titled it My Journey in Researching Depression Among Black People, Experiences of a Researcher in a Sensitive Study. Dr. Brightness Lesedi Kgatla, welcome to the Visions and Tones, Doc. Do you want to maybe share a little bit about yourself, basically, before we can dive deep into what this conversation today is mainly about, before we can dive into your paper?
I actually prefer going by Lesedi than Brightness, but it means the same thing. Lesedi Kgatla from South Africa in a small town, Hammanskraal, in a village called Mativestad. I did my MA and my PhD at the University of Johannesburg. And when I started doing sociology, I actually did not know what sociology was, because where I come from, we are not really encouraged to do courses in humanities. We are always encouraged to do IT, to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and so forth. So when I came to UJ, I actually did IT first at TUT, University of Technology. And then after a year, I was like, I know this is not me. And then that's when I transferred to UJ and I did BA in humanities. And the person that was helping me was like, okay, you should also take sociology, psychology, because that's what people take when they do humanities. And that's how I got introduced to sociology. And even today, when I go home, there are certain people that don't know what a sociologist is, and they always say, are you a psychologist? And I'm like, I end up just saying, sort of like, but for society, not just for the individual.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I get what you mean. I get that a couple of times also. I've sort of given up. I just say I'm a social researcher and I leave it there, because to explain what sociology sounds very much tedious to them.
Yeah, true.
So you published a paper. It was released in April 12, 2024. I was keen knowing perhaps if we can kickstart with this. Why a psychological topic for a sociologist?
Okay, so part of the reason why I chose to research on depression was because of personal reasons. And because of that, I realized that within our community and society, because sociology looks at not just an individual, but the environment where you come from. So I wanted to understand how a person's environment and their beliefs and values from their own society, how they influence them understanding depression, them choosing how to cope with depression, because of the stereotypes around depression, especially in the Black community, to say it's a white man's disease or it doesn't exist around Black people. So I got interested in that to see how that kind of perception from a person's community, how does it then influence them when they go through depression? Because it influenced me and it influenced my participants. When I did MA, I focused on how do Black South African youth understand and cope with depression. And from their experiences, they were also influenced by their society and how they understood and how they perceived depression.
Right.
So I wanted to understand it away from the medical model, and to say, because when you talk about depression and mental health, psychology is privileged, and it's the one where even people get surprised that how are you doing mental health, but you're not a psychologist. So I wanted to understand it from a different perception, from an alternate perception, not to say that the medical model is wrong or anything, but to say there are different ways that people view medical conditions.
And had you engaged in any psychological work or books that really speaks about depression or any other mental condition before your research? Before your interest basically in the entire depression scope?
So yeah, because as I said that when you talk about depression, mental health, psychology comes up. So it's difficult for you to research or be interested in depression without reading on or from the medical model. Because yes, I had to read, especially when defining what depression is, how it's understood from the medical model, so that I can then understand how then other people view it different from that. So I had to understand it first. This is how the medical model understands depression or describe it. But then, okay, so for me to see the difference or to compare, then I had to know from the medical model versus the sociological point of view.
Right. I mean, I think the reason why I'm asking is because when I read your paper and I see the way in which you present, your ideas and your reflections and so on and so forth, it doesn't really sound really much towards work which is done by psychologists today. So, for instance, currently I'm looking at the work of Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist based in the US. He's got a Jewish background. And he wrote a book titled The Coddling of the American Mind, which basically speaks about how good intentions and bad ideas can set a generation for failure. And it touches a little bit about, things of the mind. And also the works of Mate Gabo, who is a Canadian physician who actually speaks a lot about depression, anxiety, sadness, ADHD, and so on and so forth. In the way that they reason, you can hear that there is actually a sociological aspect in it. So I love the fact that you actually use that interdisciplinary lens of it, which it's less likely to happen, basically. I would have loved probably to hear more. How then do you reconcile the psychology and the sociology later on? But let's not talk about that now because it's not a scope of this conversation. But I commend you for doing that because, I mean, we come from the certain stream where you learn just mainly sociology. And you'll be good with your classical, your grand theories, your modernist and postmodernist, and so on and so forth. But then if you have a conversation with someone who comes from psychology, unless if you did psychology as an elective, then you can have a meaningful conversation with them. But of late, I've become sort of more interested in interdisciplinary work. How exactly does sociology relate with philosophy, interrelate with psychology, and so on and so forth? Because all those things are things that at the end of the day speaks about our psyche. Issues of environment speaks about our psyche. Nutrition speaks about our psyche. So sociologically, perhaps having that interdisciplinary knowledge can actually also help us to sort of bring forth more solutions to certain problems that we only thought they are maybe sociological, maybe psychological or philosophical or whatever the case. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a monologue with myself now.
No.
But yeah, go on.
I was saying it's actually one of the things that I was saying that from my participants as well, because they were saying that they would love to be co-creators of knowledge. And because when you go to a psychologist, the relationship there is that the professional is above you and they know, and true, they know in their area, but participant or clients feel like they are contributing something to that, and that psychology, as much as yes, we recognize the work that they have done in terms of mental health and so forth, but to at least broaden the knowledge and then include other disciplines, the anthropology, sociology, other things as well, because they do offer some knowledge to it, and it shouldn't just be psychology that is privileged, but then especially in countries such as South Africa, like African countries, because we view knowledge different from the Western world, because psychology or the medical model is influenced by the Western culture, and here we have our own African culture, and that's also why I wanted to understand depression from people's perspectives, because some of them, they don't view it within the lenses of psychology. So to actually include other disciplines as well to create even bigger knowledge. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, my master's was about the place that traditional healers have in the hearts of young people in Soweto, in a place called Shawelo. And it was very
Okay.
interesting to see how there is sort of an encouragement to a certain extent of the use of, Christianity across African traditional belief systems. So to the extent that it's not just from the families where family members can, during the day go to church and at night go to sangomas, but also those things came out even in terms of conversations that I had with few traditional healers who disclosed to me that there is a certain relationship that they're trying to encourage between nurses at the clinic and traditional healers, particularly sangomas, in a sense that if nurses cannot and doctors cannot discover what one is really struggling with, they are open to sort of refer you to somebody who works with them. But obviously there is a whole lot of, registration to be on the database so that they know reliable people who won't cause any spiritual harm or even emotional harm to the patients. So there's sort of a platform which was created, and I was very impressed to hear that,
Yeah, true. And also, I think vice versa also, because as much as yes, if a person has traditional beliefs and they are immersed in them and they present symptoms that can be maybe construed as being a spiritual healer, like having a calling. Maybe when you go to Sangoma and they see that maybe you don't actually have a calling, they themselves can also say, you know what, let me refer you to someone else and maybe direct you to the nurses and doctors. So yeah,
that's very much needed. Yeah. If we can get back to your paper, you said you're using a qualitative interpretivist approach. Can you explain to us in a layman's term what that is?
So basically what that is, like when I want to let me just use my PhD as an example. So I wanted to understand depression. So with the interpretivism approach, it's when you are trying to understand something from where a person comes from, like based on their beliefs and their values and their norms, how those things shape up their understanding of something. So in my case, I wanted to understand depression from black young people, right? So through that, I wanted to understand it from where they come from their society, the norms and values that were instilled in them, the experiences, their perceptions that the society has of depression. How did they influence their understanding of depression? So what I'm trying to understand, like you understand depression, then you find people where you want to understand it, like the people, and then who are those people influenced by? What are they influenced by? So basically, yeah, that's it.
Right. And when I go through your paper, this is mainly about yourself. You're positioning yourself into this paper. I was like, this is an interesting way because this kind of writing, you're most likely to find it either in a book, but to find it in a journal article, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. A very pressed down number of pages compared to if one was going to go into a book. And you really tackle a lot of themes here, while at the same time making reflections from your PhD, making reflections from your master's research, people that you're engaged, and so on and so forth. How has this been like for you in the context where, especially talking about mental health, talking about your own level of depression? I'm thinking about this in a context where sometimes as researchers, when we engage the community, sometimes people are a little bit skeptical about us, when we do research. I feel like, oh, you want to read my brain, you want to study my brain now, and so on and so forth. And I was like, here you are, taking all the vulnerability and putting it on the side, but coming to speak so broadly about a topic barely discussed within the African community. How has that been like for you?
So the process for me personally, it was rewarding and amazing, because when I started, I started in 2017. I was doing my honors, but at the time I was on a different topic, and I was at that time I was also struggling with my own issues with depression, and I actually remember that I wanted to quit school because I was like, I'm too tired. Everything is just too much. And when I went through that, I didn't understand it myself. So I had talked to people around me to say, I'm not okay. I don't know what's wrong, because it was bad to a point where I couldn't even understand. I was doing my honors, and I remember there was a presentation at school, and we had to read a theory. I don't know which theory I was reading. I don't know, it's Fordism or something. I don't remember, which is something I did in my undergrad and I understood very well. But I remember reading that paragraph and I could not understand anything. I could read it, but then I didn't know anything. And I remember talking to my friend about it, and I was like, no, I'm quitting because I don't understand anything, because I was deep in depression at that time. And I remember my friend was doing engineering, and then he read it for me, and I was like, I don't really understand it from a sociological perspective, but I'm just going to try my best and then just read it in layman's term where how I understand it. And then you can just present that and then take time, don't quit. And then he did that. I went and I read it. I read what he said, because I was just off. I didn't understand anything. And I remember when we presented, after presenting, I remember it was a group project. And I remember our lecturer telling our group members that you actually could have gotten a higher mark, but because of so and so's presentation, he actually got 60 something. It was me and this other girl. And I remember I even went down, like I was even more depressed, because that wasn't me. I don't know where I was. And then I realized, I started talking to people about it, and people did not, like people around me did not understand that. And it was like, why are you seeking attention? That does not exist. We don't know what you're talking about, and so forth. And that's when I started to realize that a lot of Black people from the Black community don't acknowledge depression or mental health, or when you start having suicidal thoughts, it's like you're seeking attention and so forth. And as much as you can explain it to people, they won't understand it until they go through it. And through that, I did my MA, and I still got the same comments from people and so forth. But that also gave me courage to say, to write a paper like that, to put it out there and to show that, because depression has a sort of, especially from the Black community, they have an image of what it should look like. And if you don't ascribe to that image, then you are not depressed. You cannot be depressed. So just to show that you don't have to look a certain way to have depression, and you don't have to come from a certain place for you to be depressed. Because also, I remember there's this famous rapper, I forgot who he is. He said a statement that he did not have the luxury to be depressed growing up. Perpetuating the stereotypes that when you're depressed, you don't do anything, you are just lazing around, you're unproductive. And yet those might be true on certain days, but it doesn't always look like that. So I wanted to show that image, to alter it or enhance it, and also to show the progress from where I was to where I am now. There was a time, yes, I was very, very depressed, but then that also, as I grew and I read more and I tried other coping mechanisms and so forth, I got out of, like, I advanced as a human being. As much as, yes, I can still experience depression, I can still advance as a person. You don't get stuck in the same place forever.
Now, a couple of things, maybe one or two, that I would like us to unpack from there, Doc. The conversation about Black people do not want to talk about, depression or acknowledge mental health is a conversation which is very much famous. But I wonder whether have we done enough to sort of figure out what exactly is the reason for Black people not wanting to talk about it. And when we say Black people do not want to talk about it, it seems as if by virtue of saying Black people don't want to talk about it, so we've made a sort of passive claim that white people do talk about it. But sometimes my question is, to what extent do white people talk about it? And whether part of the challenges that we have in terms of the way we do not talk about it, is it really a dismissal of the condition, or it's a matter of we do not have certain words to use to describe what we are exactly feeling? In the paper, you speak a lot about how you give an analogy of how depression is like carrying a big bowl. which obviously, if you are to tell to someone in terms of that story, you're believing that you're putting them close to understanding what exactly are you feeling. But then to somebody who doesn't have that kind of an analogy, it might become a little bit problematic, and it might make some people to be in a sense, in a state of disbelief, to say, do you even believe what you think you're going through if you cannot even explain it clearly? Sometimes when I listen to a few of the psychologists out here, for instance, Mate Gabo, talking about, the prevalence of talking about mental health in the white community, or even being more critical. One thing I love about his work is the way in which modern medicine approaches, healing in the context of mental health, particularly ADHD, depression, sadness, through which I think part of his criticisms actually are aligned with more sociological critiques to modern medicine, basically pointing out how capitalism is sitting at the center of things and so on and so forth. But now I'm going a little bit off the topic. Main thing, have we really done enough to figure out what exactly do we mean, or what exactly are the main reasons for Africans to not talk about it, and how correct are we if we're going to make the conversation about Africans yet in comparison to maybe white people?
Yeah. So what I discovered from my own experiences and through my MA, my PhD, interviewing people and having conversations with people in my community is that the problem is the image, right? So as Black people, we have this image that as a Black person, you are strong. You know, nothing can get to you. And when they compare to white people, it's just a surface comparison to say we are stronger than them, basically. So if there is anything where you are experiencing anything and then you break down and it's like you are a white person, because they are not as strong as we are as Black people. So the problem is that so then depression to some Black people, depression represents weakness, right? Depression represents a weak person, weak-minded, a lazy person, an unproductive person. And those are not the characteristics of a Black person. A Black person is very strong. A Black person is productive, we work hard and so forth. So then when you associate that person with depression, it becomes a problem, because there's then a break in the system, because I cannot be that, because as Black people, we are not weak. So it's a matter of perceiving depression as a weakness and perceiving myself as a Black person as a strong person. So because of this, they cannot coexist, because the other one is weak, the other one is strong, so they cannot come together. We are not people that should be weak, So that's where the problem is, and that's where one of few of my participants in my MA said that when they were diagnosed with depression, they went to a denial phase, because they were like, I'm a strong-willed person. I am brave. I cannot be depressed, because of how it is viewed and understood by people, for especially also for men. As a man, as a Black man, you cannot cry, you cannot show yourself crying, because that's a weakness as a man. So that's the whole image that has been built around how or what a Black person should look like, or yes, how what a Black person should look like. So with that, it doesn't then coincide with being depressed, because that will mean you are a weak person. And even if you are depressed, you need it needs to be you cannot share it with the world. You cry in a corner there, and then when you're done crying and then you come back, you can then come back. But in that also, or in my MA, I was speaking about governments, front stage and backstage. And just because you feel things in private and you don't show them in public, it does not mean they don't exist or they are not true. So I think it's that when you are at the backstage, then you can be depressed and all that. And then when you're in your front stage in before your audience, before the Black community, then you want to show that you are strong, you don't cry and so forth. Whereas, but in the backstage, you do that. So yeah, so I think that's what the problem is. The image that people have of depression, and the image of people that people have of a Black person and how they should look like.
Mhm. And where would we put aspects of history, historical information, and so on and so forth? Because anything you say mental health, technically people think, oh, you're talking about madness. And I remember growing up, before I expose how old I am also, you're not far to Pretoria. Pretoria was known as, a place of madness, Pitori Mahlanyong.
Yes.
That's what they would basically call it. And there was a mental institution there. And though I came about 5-6 hours outside of Johannesburg, but Pretoria Mahlanyong was a very famous saying, to an extent that even if you've got a little bit of a headache, or if you do something tricky, little banters as a young person, people were like, you are sick, you need to go to Pretoria Mahlanyong, Pretoria, a place of craziness. And how that some of those tiny things that we sort of say, do you think they do really contribute in the way we perceive mental health in the broader scheme of things?
Definitely, yes. So yes, Pitori Mahlanyeng. So when people talk about depression and whatever, the hospital that you're talking about is called Vescopis, right? It's a mental health institution in Pretoria. And when I also shared my experiences with it, there were certain people who would be like, you belong at Vescopis. So in anything that you like, in anything when you have a problem and it's a mental issue, people always say, it's associated with you being crazy, you being mad, you need to go to Vescopis, a mental institution. So as much as those things can be, maybe they are said in a joking manner, but to someone maybe who is experiencing depression at that point, and then that is your take on it, and that's your comment on it, and then that's what everybody is saying around you. You start to believe it, and you start to understand it from that if I have depression, it means I'm crazy. And that is also why I said some people who experience depression and they might have been away, they would refuse to go to a mental institution, because a mental clinic, because they said, I don't want to be institutionalized. I don't want to take medication, because if I do, I'm going to get worse and I'm going to be locked up in the mental institution. So that has contributed to how people then understood depression. They received discourses from their society to say, depression, when you are depressed, you are mad, you are crazy, so that has contributed to people then be like, I know that is not me. When you get diagnosed, and that's when you're like, I know that's not me, I'm not mad, and I don't need medication for me to function as a normal person.
I know, and because I used to have a friend. At some point, I just mentioned something about his mental health, and he was like, I'm not crazy, I'm not on medication. Technically, when you say mental health, people are quick to associate it with medication and hospital, but you could speak about healthy mental health, how one keeps their peace, how one sort of watches over their emotions every now and again, all those things. Yeah. In terms of your critical analysis of things, what's your take then on the fact that sometimes there's certain behaviors whereby people, if they want to escape accountability, they are likely to sort of pin it on mental health? We see that quite a lot in, the legal fraternity, legal framework, where if it is a case of murder, then you find that, the defendants will work so hard to prove that the person was out of touch with the self, they were not in good reality with the self. And because I'm thinking partly we may not need to dismiss the aspect of why exactly do people want to associate mental health with illnesses, because sometimes there's certain things, certain behaviors that we do them to escape accountability. And then people begin to develop a negative connotation whenever you speak about mental health. I mean, these things happen quite a lot. You watch it in the movies, you watch it in the news in America, you see, and I'm sorry for saying this, but unfortunately, this has been proven to be much more of a case within our white community. Perhaps why people would say, mental health is a white people's thing. It's because most cases, when you review them, such as massacres and whatnot, obviously the labeling aspect of things. If it was a black people, who goes and massacre people in a church, you'd be known as a terrorist. Or if you're from the Middle East, you'd be known as a terrorist. The labeling aspects of it. But if it's a white person, then it's easy to sort of pinpoint it onto mental health, right? We've seen quite a whole lot of shootings in America's high school shootings, and you'll hear a lot of people saying, oh, that person had a mental health issue. I remember a number of cases, including the one that happened probably about 2019 in New Zealand, Christchurch mosque shooting, where many people tried to sort of say, but the perpetrator is having mental health issues. We see quite a lot of things happening even here where we are in Australia. We had a case a couple of months ago where there was a stabbing in a shopping complex, and unfortunately, the perpetrator lost his life because the police had to, apply maximum force for the safety of people. Even in that particular case, then it was said the person is suffering from mental health. Now, this is not to sort of say they're not suffering from mental health. I don't know nothing much about their medical report. I haven't gotten access to it, but those are things that are being said. What do you make out of that, Doc, as somebody who say, okay, you've got the passion that we need to have conversations about mental health, but at the same time, that seems to be an aspect of, mental health being used as a scapegoat. And this thing is now starting to step into even, the Black community. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the case of the serial killer, Rosemary Ndlovu in South Africa, how, they were trying now to say, okay, she needs to undergo rehabilitation. And, but the state said she's not showing any signs of remorse. She's not repentant. She's the person who will not even make it if she goes to, psychiatric treatment or whatever the case. So also those kind of things, but basically I'm saying quite a lot. Let's hear what you have to say about that.
Yes, because I've seen in movies a lot of times where the lawyer will plead temporary insanity after somebody murders their partner and so forth. So I think also people have sort of like normalized or popularized depression to an extent that now it's difficult to, as you said, we're not really sure if they are. Maybe they are, but then they've popularized it to a point where it actually makes it worse trying to advocate for mental health or trying to create mental health awareness because of these things that happens on the side where people are just using it as an excuse. Because some people would say that we also, as human beings, you have emotions, you have rage and all that, but it's about how well you manage your emotions. And in that moment where somebody maybe murders their partner and so forth, and then they say it was temporary insanity and so forth. Sometimes, yes, it is an excuse because it's how you regulate your emotions. And like maybe depression, it's also the same thing. When you have depression, it's about you regulating your emotions, regulating your mood. So it's difficult for them to advocate for it when people on the side, especially in the legal system, they use it as an excuse and not even a valid excuse, an excuse to explain things. And it's becomes even more when then there's discrimination in that only white people can have that luxury or that privilege to say temporary insanity. But then when it comes to Black people, then that's not the same thing. We view it differently. So that's when then you see the authenticity of it will be questioned, the validity of it will be questioned because it does not apply to everyone. And for example, in South Africa during the apartheid times, white people were the only ones where their mental state were considered, were privileged, and were understood to say somebody does have a mental problem and so forth. But if it's a Black person, then they are crazy. Then they lock them up because they're not saying they're not normal. They're a danger to society, and that is viewed different. But then when it comes to other people, then it's viewed as an excuse for people to behave however way they want. And you can also see it in also social media where it's popularized, where everyone can just say that I have depression. People are self-diagnosing themselves to say I have depression. They normalize it, and instead of trying to create awareness, then it worsens the awareness because everyone was just like, even when a person maybe is just having a hard day or when they're sad or they have depression, you are depressing me, you're giving me anxiety. So it has gotten to a point where it is used loosely, which is which is very difficult then to say, to create awareness. For instance, also in my study, my participants were saying we don't want this image of this is what depression looks like. We want a different image to show that you can be depressed, but you can also be this type of person. But also for Black people to acknowledge that there's depression. So when they are in the state of depressed state, they would video themselves and post it. And to other people, it's like you are seeking attention. How are you crying while videoing yourself? So those things have, as much as they can be used in cases where it is valid and it is true, there are on the other side people who are using it just as an excuse for their behavior. And it's difficult, especially when you person outside looking from the outside. It's very difficult for you to, even more difficult on social media, to know, is this person real? Are they authentic? Are they really depressed? And when a person also has maybe a mental problem and they went and killed and murdered people because of their mental issues, which maybe they do really have, but because of everything that is happening around us, it's difficult to really pinpoint and know that this is real or this is not.
Maybe an unfair question, Doc, if you can touch maybe on one or two cases. How do we turn around from that? Because I can see the passion that you do want to advocate for mental health, particularly depression, but it becomes difficult due to the different complexities. What would you say is a way around that?
So I think firstly is really understanding like mental health, really understanding it, really knowing it. And people, like I'll speak on different, maybe like give different instances. So for instances, let's say in the Black community, in a Black family, when somebody has mental problems, for it to be a serious conversation where you allow a space where someone can actually come to you and talk to you and be open about their issues and understanding it, and not making jokes or stereotypical things, because you see, like after my studies and the podcast that I did, a lot of people saw it. As much as I've told certain people about my experiences with depression, certain people did not see it. And even after seeing it, even after explaining it, probably even after this interview, I still get the same comments from them. And you still get the comments where somebody is actually, like of a better word, dissing you, but they do it with a smile. Like, yo, happy, we don't want to set you off, Those things do not create positive space for people to come talk to you or be open about their issues, because it further pushes them away or perpetuates a stereotype about depression. So for me personally, like people are around my community, they know that what my research interests are, what I'm interested in. And sometimes when a person is not okay, that they know, my mom or my aunt will be like, you need to talk. Can you talk to someone, some so. They're not okay. I think they're having some mental issues. Can you talk to them? So, or my siblings or my friends, they will come to me to talk about their problems and will send me a voice note like 14 minutes, and I'll listen to it and I'll respond. So by doing that, I've created a positive space around me and people around me to say, whenever you're not okay, you can come talk to me, and they know that I'm serious about it. So they're not going to come talk to me and then make jokes and all that. I will listen and I'll talk to them. So creating a space that allows people to be open with their experiences and to share their experiences, and from different platforms as well. If maybe you are an influencer, make sure that you provide people with the right information, that when you dedicate yourself to doing psycho education online, provide people with accurate information and direct people to the right channels where you cannot, like also in movies as well, the media as well. You watch movies, because I remember there was this series, 13 reasons why, where a lot of people criticized it because firstly, the executive producer, I think it was Selena Gomez, and she's famous, and they were saying the show was actually normalizing or popularizing depression. They're romanticizing it, because apparently when it came out, there were a lot of suicides in America because of the series. So understanding your position and understanding your influence to other people, and I do understand what they were trying to do with the show. When I watched it, I understood it. But then also being careful with where you are, your positionality, your influence to people. As also as a researcher, when I also report and I write about it, I need to also have some sort of responsibility, because I think nowadays, as you said, a lot of people run away from accountability, and people can easily say, I'm not responsible for anybody's child. I don't have a child, so I'm not responsible. But then you have influence, whether you like it or not, you do have an influence. So understanding your positionality and understanding your influence will go a long way for people.
Right. I mean, it's beautiful points you're raising there, and you're making me, when you're speaking about influences at the same time, you're making me think about the character Dr. Lani. So as much as we want to do, activism, we need to be careful not to find ourselves having a repeat of Dr. Lani, who is, I don't know if you remember the character?
Doctor, no. From where?
The South African famous doctor who did not even made it to Wits University.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember.
Yeah. So because TikTok also has brought us other kinds of challenges, right? Where we say we don't want to censor people, but at the same time, people can be harmful to the consumers of their content, or the people who watch their contents every now and again. My next question, do you think we are doing enough as institutions, especially higher education, educating even the staff members? Because I'm thinking part of the ways we can make it into society is if we also have professionals who are fully vested with what we're talking about. It was really sad for me in your paper to find that a whole professor and a PhD candidate actually spoke about mental health in a very disdainful way. It was very sad. Do you think we're doing enough as institutions, universities in South Africa, even though people are not coming from the humanities, but to have campaigns, to have talks with all different departments about mental health, or have even a day where it might be, a mental health day, and then we really do something really impactful to educate even our professionals there?
I think probably there are places where they are doing enough, but you also, as you said, TikTok provides us a lot of information. So you see a lot of people, young people, not also on social media, those that also around my circle, where a person will leave their job because of they cannot take it anymore. It's very stressful at work. They are emotionally being abused and all that and all that. So as much as I think every organization do have a department where it's about wellness and talking to their employees to be coming to share their own problems and so forth. But it's also, it becomes a problem also when you are in an organization and it's someone that is above you that is contributing to your mental health negatively. Then because as much as you can go to a psychologist in your organization and talk to them, you're still going back to the same environment that is affecting you negatively. So you are the only person that's going to be going up and down, and there is nothing that is being done to the environment. So I think more has to be done, and there should be also accountability, because as much as I go to a psychologist and they offer all the support and they give me the tools to cope with everything, it's not going to help for long term, because I'm still going back to the same person and I'm still going back to the same environment. So it then defeats the purpose if you're only just going to focus on the individual and you don't focus on the whole environment, because it does not fix the problem. You're going to give me the tools, but then it's just a temporary solution. It's like a band-aid, and you're still going back to the same issues. So I think more can be done, and there should be accountability. I was talking to a colleague of mine last week who their superior was putting them through a lot and having unnecessary demands and so forth and what. And even when they reported, that person has relationships with the other people from other like the executives. So even if you say something, it's just gonna. So a lot should be done to make people feel more safer, but also at the same time, you cannot force people into believing this, because as much as, yes, we can believe in there is depression, there's mental health, there are certain people who don't believe that. There are certain people who still believe that it doesn't exist and you're still being weak and all that and all that. So if then that's the case, then how do we navigate through that way? We are in an environment where a person doesn't really believe that they're in depression or exhaustion and all that, and then you have campaigns to talk about that. They're not going to come. And can you force them to come? You cannot force them to come if it's not their belief. They don't believe in that. They don't see that. So then it becomes very difficult to create a peaceful environment, because we're different as people. We come from different backgrounds. We are of different generations. We have different beliefs from our respected cultures and society and so forth. And we are just in one place. So mostly people rely on you being a decent human being, you to exercise some sort of decency, to say, okay, as much as I don't believe that, if they believe that, then okay, then that is fine. But it's very difficult to then, because it's like, oh, you're pushing me to your direction, your perception of things. I don't believe in that. I don't have to do that. I believe in that. So I'm not going to go to the campaigns and the wellness, what, and what.
I mean, it's a lot of brilliant points that you're raising there. The most dangerous part that really stood out for me in the talk you had now, it's about the danger also of the workplace, how sometimes they are the actual perpetrators of, mental health. Sometimes I laugh when I see TikTok clips, people try to say, he's HR saying to you, if you have a problem, please feel free to come and talk to us. You are the problem. You are the problem.
When the problem asks you what's wrong.
So I always laugh and I'm like, the reality in this. But at the same time, I'm thinking maybe if you can speak to us, Doc, in terms of your case now. You are in the most demanding field where I feel like academia, it's the most toughest place. Okay, saying this, not comparing it to others, because people would say, well, toughest is relative, right? But I mean, there are certain demands here for someone who's working through depression, but at the same time, there's capitalism sitting on your throat. The neoliberal structure with higher education these days, for me, has reshaped to be something too dangerous, which I feel like it contributes actually to the mental health of scholars to a certain extent. You've got pressure of publication. You've got pressure of looking after your students. Students are not doing the work. You've got pressure that you need to speak to students with care, because our students today are customers as per the neoliberal structure, or else you could be fired just anyhow. Students can go and fabricate wrong information about the lecturer. You've got all those kind of pressures. At the same time, at home, you've got family, whether married or not married, but there still should be that work-life balance. And it's not really easy to strike it at some point. How do you find a place to breathe within all this chaos?
So, like I remember my family likes making a joke that I love Friends way too much. So that's my go-to. When I want to relax, I'll watch Friends and rewatch, or sitcoms. Any sitcoms I'll watch and rewatch. And also, like someone was saying to me, why do you like fiction? Like books. If I read a book, it's gonna be fiction. And I'm like, I read for a living. I'm always reading. I'm reading my material as a researcher. I'm reading the students' things. I'm reading their essay. I'm marking. So when I actually want to relax and read something, I'm not going to read something that is difficult to comprehend, or I'm gonna read politics and what. I want something fictional so that I can relax, because it is very, because you are. But I think also when you have goals for yourself personally, and it's not just about the organization is expecting this from you, but you are expecting it from yourself. So I personally, like, I want to publish, right? So even if my job expects that from me, it's something that I'm already expecting from myself. So I'm not seeing it as pressure from my organization, because it's something that I also want to do. So that helps me as well. Even with the teaching and so forth, it's about myself. And one thing that I've mastered also is time management. that I know what I plan my weeks, I plan my days, and I make sure that I stick to the schedule. A lot of people, my friends, would say that you have OCD because I'm very strict. If I say I'm doing this today, I'm doing it, I'm doing that, I'm doing, so that helps me as well too. And by doing that, it gives me a sense of peace. Just by knowing that I have a schedule, I have a plan. My problem comes when I don't have a plan. That's when I fall apart. But and I have a plan, then, and it's also because I work at UNISA, it's distance learning. So we usually have online sessions. We don't have contact classes. So we have online sessions, you and so forth. And the pressure is having to, encourage students to attend classes, to do what, because they are at a distance. So you will try to bridge the gap, but it's difficult when everything is online. So, but you try to bridge the gap, to talk to students and so forth, to find ways so that they can, uh, to find a way for them to be interested in online sessions and so forth. So it's something that I enjoy. I think I was blessed enough to be in a space that I prayed for. So that does not really afford me. Obviously, there is pressure there and there, but it's not something where I'll be like, it will affect me way, way, way too much, because it's something that I've said for myself as well. Like, I'm blessed that my goals are similar to that or where I'm working.
Right. Look, I really need to thank you. I think we've had a bit of a chat. What I'll make this paper available on the bio of this episode, if it's okay with you, because I need
That's
people
okay.
to sort of engage the paper and hear more of your voice as compared to a more already interpreted or translated meaning in terms of the things that I say and the questions that I ask. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for really being an advocate for mental health, talking about depression. I'm tempted to ask as a last thing whether there is definite work from your critical review of literature that basically talks more about the causes of depression. And I'm a little bit worried about this question because I know very well I'm asking more a sociologist than a psychologist. I've listened to different versions from psychologists, right? For instance, when I listen to the works of Mate Gabo, he's really been a guy that I really loved his work quite a lot. And Mate Gabo, when he speaks about it, he speaks about depression basically meaning a suppression of one's emotions, right? In your analogy, you spoke about having a big ball, having to carry a big ball around. But Mate sort of traces it from childhood, how one basically learns to suppress, their emotions, particularly anger, but mostly you just learn how to suppress your emotions. But the more you learn to suppress your emotions, the more vulnerability that will create in the long run, where you lose touch of the self.
Yeah, true.
So I'm just keen hearing from you in the way you've sort of reviewed it. How would you map it? And this is not a debate between you and Mate or you to review Mate, but to say perhaps with your response, we can maybe learn also certain things in the way that we approach life, whether social media plays a part in terms of our happiness or not. When Mate speaks, for instance, about ADHD and whatsoever, part of the things they go back to the healthiness of the family. If the family is not healthy, it has certain ways to sort of challenge or be a stumbling block to the freedom of a child. Speaks a lot about also raising children, when parents are not responsive to the emotional needs of the children, that has a way that it can also create a little bit of anxiety and so on and so forth. But I wonder whether in your work, Doc, as a sociologist, bridging the gap between sociological and psychological work, do you have maybe words you can leave with us, things we need to sort of be cautious of?
Yes, definitely. I do agree that where depression sort of like suppressing your feelings, and then it gets to a place where it's dark, it's even darker than where you were. Because I definitely can see the difference between when I was okay and when I was, so like growing up until maybe around grade 9, or actually grade 7, I can see that I was different. And then from there on 8 going forward, where now I had depression and it worsened as the years went by, is because of the suppression. Also going back to what I said about the image of being strong. I wanted to be strong because when even after a bad thing happens after another, while you're dealing with this, something else comes up, and then you're just like, you know what? And like I once said that it's like you are in a fire. When you are burning in a fire, you're in flames. All you want is just to get out of the fire. And the minute you get out of the fire, you think that you're okay. And as much as I've gotten out of situations that were burning me, that were depressing me, it does not mean that because I'm out of the fire, I'm okay. You still need to deal with the after effects of the fire. And a lot of people neglect that. And the minute you neglect that, you just put a band-aid on it and just move on. That wound will internalize itself, and then you are more affected because you do not deal with it. So we suppress things, and you get to a point where you are not okay, or you become a different version of yourself because you have neglected your emotions, because you think that as long as I'm out of there, then I am okay, which is a problem for a lot of people. But as I said in the paper, that it's like you are carrying a burden that is only be seen by you and no one else. And if I'm saying that I'm chained to a huge ball, that can only be seen by me. It's very hard to convince the next person to say there is a ball chained to. It's difficult for people to understand unless a person experiences the same thing as well. That's when they will understand it. They will understand how, because it's going to affect how you walk, how you speak, how your energy and so forth. If another person has it, they will understand it as well. So depression is also like that. It's very difficult for people to understand it unless they go through it, unfortunately, for a lot of people. So yeah, and in terms of social media does play a role for a lot of people because there is a lot of comparison on social media. And the sad part is it can also be people perpetuate a certain image on social media. We're only posting our highs and not our lows. So when somebody is in the moment of their low and they're on social media and they see someone posting that they are in a holiday or whatever, they envy that, and it contributes to them being in an even lower mood. So it, like as I said, it's about regulating your mood, managing your social media in a way that will affect you positively. Because as much as, like I said, people say they're not responsible for another person, so you're responsible for yourself. So if you're gonna go on social media and and compare yourself to other people, then it becomes a danger to you because we don't really know people's lives. It's easy for people to put up a fake life or facade on social media to portray a certain image about themselves, that they are okay or they're successful and so forth. But that is not the case. I remember I was talking to my brothers. We were living in a village called Matilstad in Hammanskraal, and my mom got married, and then we moved to this location. You see, like in South Africa, it's like it's like the villages, and then townships are more successful in Yana people. And so people there were calling my brothers, who were grown at that time, they were calling my brothers cheese boys. No, cheese boys is like cheese boys.
Privileged kid, yeah.
Yeah, privileged kids. And I was talking to them, I was telling them that you see how people are envying you right now. They don't know where you come from. If right now they would say exchange lives with them, but they have to start from the beginning, they will see that they might not want to be you because they're only seeing the results now. But they don't see where you come from when you were poor, you did not have food, and so forth and so forth. That they don't see. They're only seeing the now. And if you can understand that and not compare yourself to other people, you don't know where the people came from. You don't know to be where they are, what they had to go through. So do not compare yourself to other people because you're only seeing what they're allowing you to see, or you're only seeing the now, the surface, but then you don't know what's happening underneath. So if people can understand that, that would really be helpful for a lot of people.
Amazing. Dr. Lesedi, thank you. I think that's a great place to land. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. You have a great afternoon in
Thanks.
South Africa.
You too. Oh, it's evening for you.
It is, yes.
Oh, enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. Thanks, Fishes and Tones. That was Dr. Lesedi Kgatla. And as I said, as we started this episode, please do not treat this as a diagnostic episode. If you are struggling or you need any diagnosis, please make sure that you speak to your GP or speak to your psychologist, or you can look for counselors in the communities for those who are more rooted in spiritual levels. Please speak to your spiritual leaders. And we wish you all the best. Go in best, be best human beings and be best versions of yourselves. And we are out. Cheers.